Killian Sterling had been a sickly boy since the day he was born. To save him, the Sterling family took in 4 girls as potential spiritual brides. On the day of the final selection, a renowned mystic was invited to read our charts. He claimed that my astrological alignment was rare, possessing the power to bring immense prosperity and fertility. The Sterlings immediately arranged my marriage to Killian. Within 3 months, the once-frail Killian made a miraculous recovery. I also fell pregnant with twins, a boy and a girl. The Sterling elders were ecstatic, promising that my son would inherit the family empire once he was born. But on the night of the baby's 1-month celebration, Killian locked me and the children in the basement. I broke down, screaming at him, demanding to know why he was doing this. He only gave me a cold, mocking smirk. If it weren't for your so-called luck, Melody would have been the one standing by my side. She wouldn't have jumped to her death because of depression. Today, you and these brats are going to join her. He grabbed a heavy iron rod and swung it violently at our 1-month-old son. I threw myself over the baby to protect him, but Killian kicked me away with a brutal force. Blood splattered across the cold walls and the floor. My baby's breath faded into nothingness. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day Killian had to choose his bride. I stood in the familiar, opulent Sterling manor. The invited mystic sat upright, carefully examining each girl's birth details one by one. My entire body was trembling. The phantom pain of my bones being shattered by that iron rod still pulsed through me. I hadn't died, I had actually come back. The mystic suddenly looked up, his face glowing with excitement. He pointed a shaking finger at me. This girl's alignment is perfection. She is a natural beacon of prosperity and fertility. She will undoubtedly ward off all evil and ensure Master Killian lives a long, peaceful life. The moment he finished, Mrs. Sterling rushed forward and grabbed my hand. Wonderful. This is a miracle. Killian is saved. I fought the urge to yank my hand away as bile rose in my throat. Killian's illness was something he was born with, and no hospital could cure it. Many experts had predicted he wouldn't live past 21. He was only 3 months away from that deadline. In my past life, I really did bless him, curing his body and giving him twins. I opened my mouth, desperate to reject this and escape the nightmare. But Killian spoke first. It's the 21st century, Mom. I want to marry someone I actually love. He walked slowly toward Melody Lane, who was standing in the corner, and took her hand. Melody looked at him with eyes full of artificial sweetness, her cheeks flushed like peach blossoms. I looked at Killian in utter shock. In my previous life, he hadn't said a word at this moment. He had just accepted the family's choice. Had he also been reborn? Mrs. Sterling tried to reason with him. Killian, don't be reckless. Your health comes first. Rowan's fate is the only thing that can help your condition. Killian remained firm, gripping Melody's hand even tighter. Mom, I'm just a little weak. It's no big deal. If I can't have Melody, I'd rather die. His voice was still raspy from his illness, but his tone left no room for doubt. Melody's eyes welled up with tears of joy as she leaned her head on his shoulder. You're so good to me, Killian. Don't worry, I've found some ancient remedies that will definitely make you healthy. He looked at her with deep affection and promised, Melody, you are the only wife I'll ever have. Seeing her son's stubbornness, Mrs. Sterling eventually sighed and nodded. Fine, if that is what you want. I let out a long, silent breath of relief. Whether Killian was reborn or not didn't matter. As long as I didn't have to marry him, it was the best possible outcome. I could leave this hellish family and start my own life. According to the rules, those of us not chosen were supposed to pack our things and leave. There was no downside for us. It was the deal we'd made when they first sponsored us. I went back to my room with an excited heart and started packing my few belongings. During my years with the Sterlings, I owned almost nothing. I had a few outfits and some basic toiletries. But when I tried to drag my suitcase out the door, 2 bodyguards in black suits blocked my path. Killian stood there, watching me with cold, indifferent eyes. You will stay in this room until my wedding is over. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. What is that supposed to mean? You chose Melody, didn't you? Killian stepped closer, a cruel smirk dancing on his lips. You're still not leaving. Who knows if you'll try to sabotage the wedding? My heart sank into my stomach. Let me go. I won't do anything to your wedding. I don't even want to be near you. Killian let out a sharp, mocking laugh. You're back to, aren't you? In the last life, you set Melody up to die just to keep your spot as my wife. I don't trust a poisonous woman like you for a second. He actually thought I was responsible for Melody's death. I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never laid a hand on anyone. Stop acting so innocent. Killian took another step forward, his eyes dripping with pure hatred. Melody sent me a text before she died saying it was all because of you. It wasn't enough that you bullied her. You had to keep tormenting her even after you married me. My chest tightened with rage. This was absolutely ridiculous. Melody and I grew up in the same rundown orphanage. She was older and stronger than me, and she spent every day bullying me with her group of friends. How could I have ever bullied her? In my last life, after she died, I heard the truth from the servants who handled her body. She had been heavily involved with illegal substances and died during a wild, drug-fueled party. Mrs. Sterling had only claimed it was depression-related to protect the family's reputation. Apparently, Killian had been kept completely in the dark. And because of Melody's lies, he had been heartless enough to kill me and our babies. I let out a cold laugh. She said it, so it must be true? I had no reason to do any of that. I'm not interested in you anymore. Let me leave. Killian didn't buy it. Of course you had a reason. You put on that sweet, pathetic act just to get into this family. As for that mystic reading, Melody told me you paid someone to rig it, stealing her fate for yourself. That woman was a pathological liar, and Killian was stupid enough to believe her without checking. Melody is full of crap. I don't believe in that superstitious stuff, let alone rig it. Killian's face darkened instantly. Shut up. I won't let you slander her. She is an angel. And you're just a gold digger who would do anything to climb the social ladder. I won't believe a word you say. You'd better stay put. You're not stepping a foot out of this room until the wedding is over. With that, he turned and walked away. The two bodyguards stepped forward like a stone wall, sealing the exit. I watched his retreating back as a chill ran down my spine. He was completely brainwashed by Melody, and his hatred for me was deep-seated. He trusted her more than his own eyes or logic. I was trapped in this room, just like I had been trapped in that basement. What kind of game are you playing now? Killian pushed the door open, his silhouette framed by the light. My hunger strike over the last few days had finally forced him to show up. I forced myself to sit up, my stomach cramping so hard I broke into a cold sweat. Let me out. I don't want to be here. He frowned with annoyance. I warned you not to mess with my wedding. Threatening to kill yourself won't work. A self-deprecating smile touched my lips. You think too highly of yourself, Killian. I value my life much more than you do yours. He seemed taken aback for a second, then sneered. Fine. Once I marry Melody, I might find a place for you as my mistress. Just behave and stop causing trouble. But you stay away from Melody. Don't you dare say a word to upset her. He actually thought he was doing me a favor by offering to make me his side piece. I must have been blind to ever love a piece of trash like him. Every word coming out of his mouth made me want to vomit. I couldn't even remember the little boy who used to sneak me candy and protect me from bullies. The man standing before me now was as disgusting as a cockroach in a sewer. I didn't have the energy to argue. I just wanted to leave. I don't want your pathetic place. Even if you keep me here, you need to give me actual food. Stop sending me that rotten, spoiled garbage. Killian's frown deepened. That's impossible. Melody personally told the maids to take care of your meals. She told me she was worried you weren't eating well, and insisted on 3-course meals. That lying bitch. I took a deep breath and pointed at the tray on the floor. Have your man open that container. See for yourself. My voice was weak, but laced with mockery. Look at your 3-course meal. Killian's eyes were full of impatience and disgust. What are you trying to do? Get my attention with this? Is this the best you can come up with, Rowan? Still, he gestured to one of the bodyguards. The guard stepped forward and opened the tray with a look of distaste. Immediately, the stench of sour, rotting food filled the room. Even Killian froze, a flicker of doubt crossing his eyes. Suddenly, a high-pitched voice came from the hallway. Killian, honey, I made Rowan's favorite food myself. Melody Lane walked in, carrying a brand new thermal bag. I heard Rowan was refusing to eat, and it just breaks my heart. She opened the containers, and the delicious aroma of fresh food filled the air. Seeing the food Melody brought, Killian's doubt vanished instantly, replaced by his usual hatred for me. You're trying to frame Melody again? Look at what she brought you, and then look at the mess you made. What else do you have to say? Melody started sobbing, her voice trembling. I knew Rowan would say the food was bad, but she's let it sit out for days. Of course it's spoiled now. Don't cry, Melody. Ignore her. Let her starve if that's what she wants. Killian comforted her gently while glaring at me like I was scum. My heart went completely cold. He would never believe me, even when the truth was staring him in the face. I couldn't just wait here to die. I had to get out. I want to see Mrs. Sterling. My voice was weak, but firm. Killian laughed. Why? To tattle on us. I looked him straight in the eyes, showing no fear. Yes. And if you don't call her, I'll bash my head against this wall. I'll turn your wedding day into a funeral. Killian's face turned pale with rage, and he suddenly lunged forward, grabbing my throat. You wouldn't dare. I stared back at him, my eyes full of mockery. In my last life, I was too afraid of him, too in love with him, and it destroyed me. Now, I had nothing left to lose. If I had to die, so be it. His hand squeezed tighter, and I struggled for air. Just as I thought I might actually black out, a sharp voice cut through the room. Killian, let her go. What on earth are you doing? The pressure on my neck vanished, and I slumped down, gasping for air. Mrs. Sterling was standing in the doorway, looking furious. Beside her stood Mrs. Vance from the neighboring estate. Mrs. Sterling shot Killian a warning look before forcing a smile for Mrs. Vance. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Vance. Just a small family disagreement." Mrs. Sterling gave an awkward laugh and pulled me up by the arm. "Mrs. Vance, this is the girl I was telling you about. Rowan Thorne, the one with the lucky alignment." Looking at Mrs. Vance, a memory from my past life surfaced. Her only son, Gideon Vance, had died of terminal illness the night before my wedding. Mrs. Vance's eyes were full of deep, haunting despair, but when she looked at me, there was a tiny, desperate spark of hope. She reached out and gripped my hands tightly. "Rowan, I know this is sudden, but my son is very sick. The doctors say there is no hope left." Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "I'm desperate. I'm willing to try anything at this point. I'm begging you. Please marry my son. Use your luck to save him. Please, just give him a chance to breathe again." A bright light flared in my eyes. "I'll do it." Gideon Vance was known to be a true gentleman, kind and fair. A man like that didn't deserve to die. Plus, marrying him was my only way to escape Killian forever. The moment the words left my mouth, Killian, who had been brooding in the corner, shouted out, "What the hell are you saying? I don't allow it." He tried to grab me again, but Mrs. Sterling held him back. "Killian, stop it." He ignored his mother, staring at me with burning eyes. "Rowan Thorne, you wouldn't dare." I sneered. "Why wouldn't I?" Mrs. Vance, terrified I would change my mind, quickly pulled a marriage contract from her bag. I recognized the format. I had signed a similar one in my last life. She handed it to me, her eyes pleading. "The mystic said the moment you sign your name, your luck will begin to protect him. Please just sign it." Without a second of hesitation, I took the pen and wrote my name. As I finished the last stroke, I looked up and met Killian's dark, murderous gaze. I could clearly see a faint, dark shadow creeping across his forehead. "Rowan Thorne, you traitorous bitch. You actually did it." He roared at me, lunging forward once more. But suddenly he froze. He clutched his chest, his face contorting in extreme agony. Aggie. A massive spray of bright red blood erupted from his mouth, painting the floor. The spray of dark, arterial blood hit the white marble floor with a sickening, wet splash. Killian collapsed to his knees, his hands clawing at his throat, his breath coming in ragged, whistling gasps. His face had gone from a sickly pallor to the gray, translucent shade of curdled tallow. "Killian!" Mrs. Sterling shrieked, dropping to her knees beside her son, heedless of the blood soaking into her silk skirt. "Doctor! Call Dr. Thorne. Get the oxygen concentrator. Move, you fools." Melody stood frozen in the doorway, the fresh thermal food container slipping from her manicured fingers. Soup and braised meat splattered across her designer pumps, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were locked on Killian's trembling frame with naked, unvarnished terror. She didn't run to his side. She took half a step backward, her hand instinctively coming up to cover her nose from the metallic stench of iron that filled the room. "Rowan," Killian wheezed, lifting his head from the floor. His bloodshot eyes glared at me through a crimson haze, his teeth stained red. "You cursed me. What did you do to me?" "I didn't do anything to you, Master Killian," I said, my voice steady, cool, and devoid of the terror that had once ruled my life. "You chose your wife. And I chose my husband." Mrs. Vance didn't wait for the Sterling servants to regain their senses. With the iron grip of a mother fighting for her son's final breath, she pulled me toward the door, shielding my body with her own. "Let's go, child," Mrs. Vance whispered, her voice fierce beneath her tears. "Before their rot touches you." Two private security officers in charcoal suits, men bearing the silver crest of the Vance dynasty on their lapels, stepped in front of us, forming an impenetrable wall between me and the screaming chaos of the Sterling estate. As we crossed the threshold, I looked back one last time. Killian was thrashing on the bloody floor, his mother wailing into his hair, while Melody backed out of the room with a look of pure revulsion on her face. The invisible thread of vitality that had sustained him in my past life, the life force he had mocked, despised, and ultimately slaughtered, was completely severed, and the debt of blood had begun to collect its first payment. The Vance estate was nestled within the secluded northern hills of the city, surrounded by towering ancient pines and rolling terraces of wild lavender. Unlike the ostentatious, cold opulence of the Sterling manor, the Vance home carried the dignified, enduring quiet of old stone, polished walnut, and the soothing, earthy scent of slow-simmering herbal decoctions. Mrs. Vance led me directly to the master suite on the second floor. "Gideon's condition deteriorated 3 days ago," Mrs. Vance said softly, her hand trembling as she opened the heavy oak door. "The specialists from Boston and Zurich said his cardiopulmonary system is shutting down. He has refused the mechanical ventilators. He said he wanted to leave this world with dignity." The room was dim, illuminated only by the amber glow of a reading lamp by the bed. Lying beneath a dark linen quilt was Gideon Vance. He was 24, with sharp, aristocratic features that even the ravages of a terminal illness could not diminish. His skin was pale as polished marble, his cheekbones high and prominent, his dark hair falling across a forehead beaded with cold sweat. His breathing was shallow, a faint, rhythmic rattle that sounded like dry leaves scraping across stone. Yet, when the door clicked shut, his long eyelashes fluttered, and his eyes opened. They were deep, obsidian, and impossibly clear. "Mother." Gideon's voice was a soft rasp, barely louder than a whisper. "I told you not to bring more doctors. It's time." "She isn't a doctor, Gideon," Mrs. Vance said, walking to his side and gently placing my hand over his cold, calloused palm. "This is Rowan. She has agreed to be your wife." Gideon's gaze shifted to me. There was no feverish madness in his eyes, no entitled arrogance like Killian possessed. There was only a profound, quiet stillness. He looked down at our joined hands, my fingers warm, his freezing, and frowned slightly with gentle concern. "Mother, this is madness," Gideon breathed, his chest hitching with the effort to speak. "She is so young. You cannot chain a girl's life to a dying man's tomb." "I signed the contract willingly, Mr. Vance," I said, stepping closer to the edge of the mattress. I looked into his eyes and felt something I had never experienced in 7 years of groveling at Killian's feet, respect. "I do not come here as a martyr," I continued, my voice carrying the steady resonance of a soul that had crossed the river of death. "And you are not going into a tomb." I reached out with my other hand, gently pressing my palm against the center of his chest, directly over his failing heart. In an instant, a strange, warm hum reverberated through my marrow. It was not painful. It felt like the sudden, golden rush of spring water, breaking through winter ice. The celestial alignment the old mystic had spoken of, the natural beacon of life, fertility, and renewal that I was born with, ignited within my blood. Gideon's breath caught in his throat. His pupils dilated. The grayish tint around his lips began to recede, replaced by a faint, healthy flush of peach. The violent, erratic fluttering beneath his ribs steadied into a deep, rhythmic, powerful pulse that echoed through the quiet room. "Mrs. Vance," gasped, covering her mouth with both hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. The heart monitor beside the bed, which had been emitting a flat, sluggish warning chime for 48 hours, suddenly beeped with crisp, unwavering regularity. Heart rate, 72 BPM. Oxygen saturation, 98%. Gideon lifted his hand, a hand that had been too weak to hold a water glass this morning, and slowly, gently curled his long fingers around mine. He looked at me, his dark eyes wide with an astonishment that bordered on reverence. "Who are you?" "Rowan," he whispered. I smiled. The first genuine smile that had touched my face in 2 lifetimes. "I am your wife, Gideon. And tomorrow we are going to live." 2 months passed like the melting of a long frost. While the medical world hailed Gideon Vance's recovery as the greatest physiological miracle of the century, the Sterling family was descending into the 7th circle of hell. Killian's condition had not merely worsened, it had completely collapsed. Without my alignment shielding his frail constitution, the congenital genetic rot in his organs accelerated at a terrifying speed. He suffered from chronic internal hemorrhages, his bone density plummeted, and his joints swelled with agonizing gout. To hide his deteriorating state from the family's corporate board, Killian was pumped full of high-dose corticosteroids, experimental immunosuppressants, and heavy liquid morphine. His face had become puffy and waxen, his hair falling out in clumps, his eyes sunken into dark purple sockets that burned with a manic, paranoid rage. Worse still was his marriage to Melody Lane. Once the wedding was finalized and Melody secured her legal status as the young mistress of the Sterling estate, her gentle, devoted angel mask disintegrated. Within 48 hours, she refused to nurse Killian, claiming that the smell of his medicinal salves made her vomit. She spent her days shopping in the luxury districts of Manhattan, maxing out the family's auxiliary credit lines, and hosting wild, all-night parties at the Sterling seaside villas with her circle of seedy, underground acquaintances. On a rainy Thursday morning, the city's Grand Trade and Heritage Gala was held at the Metropolitan Convention Center. It was the most prestigious social event of the year, attended by the state governor, international venture capitalists, and the heads of the 4 founding families. Killian sat in a motorized wheelchair in the VIP lounge, dressed in a custom 3-piece tuxedo that hung loosely from his emaciated frame. His fingers were wrapped in silk bandages to hide the bleeding fissures in his skin. An oxygen cannula was hooked discreetly beneath his nose. "Where is Melody?" Killian wheezed, his voice sounding like 2 dry stones grinding together. "The keynote presentation begins in 10 minutes. His assistant, trembling with nervousness, lowered his head. Miss Melody, she was in the champagne suite with Mr. Cashin from the Southside Syndicate. He said. She said your appearance is embarrassing and that she'll join you on stage for the photos. Killian's jaw tightened until his gums bled. He gripped the armrest of his wheelchair so hard the plastic cracked. That ungrateful whore. I gave her the Sterling name. I threw away the beacon of prosperity for her. Before he could finish his curse, the double doors of the grand ballroom swung wide open. A sudden, breathless hush fell over the 3,000 guests in the hall. Walking down the central carpeted aisle, flanked by 4 senior directors of the Global Commerce Alliance, was Gideon Vance. He was unrecognizable from the dying invalid of 2 months ago. Standing at 6'2" with broad shoulders, an impeccably tailored, charcoal gray Brioni suit, and the effortless, predatory grace of an untamed king, Gideon commanded the room with a single glance. His dark hair was styled back, revealing a sharp, chiseled jawline, and his eyes burned with a vitality so radiant it made the surrounding socialites hold their breath. And on his arm was me. I wore an exquisite, midnight emerald evening gown of silk velvet, adorned with the Vance family's heirloom star sapphire necklace. My dark hair fell in glossy, healthy waves past my waist, my skin glowing with the porcelain perfection of a woman who was cherished, protected, and completely whole. Look at Mr. Vance. Is that really Gideon Vance? They said he was on his deathbed. And who is that woman beside him? She looks like a goddess of dawn. The murmurs rippled through the crowd like wildfire. In his wheelchair near the front row, Killian stared at us, his pupils shrinking to the size of pinpoints. His heart battered violently against his ribs, sending a searing wave of agony through his chest. Rowan. The woman standing on Gideon's arm was not the pale, starving, shivering orphan who had begged him for a scrap of bread in his bedroom. She was breathtaking. She was majestic. She carried an aura of such blinding prosperity and grace that every titan of industry in the hall bowed their heads as she passed. No. Killian whispered, his hands shaking so violently that his oxygen tube slipped from his nostril. No, that was supposed to be mine. That was my wife. Gideon and I stepped onto the grand stage. The governor of the state stepped forward, shaking Gideon's hand with profound reverence before handing him the microphone. Thank you, everyone. Gideon's deep, resonant baritone echoed across the hall, carrying the absolute authority of a sovereign. Today, the Vance Group announces the acquisition of the Northern Maritime Logistics Network, alongside a $50 million endowment to establish the Rowan Thorne Maternal and Pediatric Research Foundation. He turned to me, his dark eyes softening with a warmth so deep and tender it made my throat tighten with sweet emotion. Before the flashing cameras of 200 journalists, the proud, unyielding Gideon Vance bent on one knee, took my right hand, and placed a soft, lingering kiss upon my knuckles. Everything I build, and every breath I draw in this world, Gideon said into the microphone, his voice clear as a bell, belongs to my wife Rowan. The grand hall erupted into thunderous, standing applause. In the front row, Killian let out a strangled, animalistic howl of pure agony. He shoved the controls of his motorized wheelchair forward, crashing through the velvet ropes, screaming with all the air left in his ruined lungs. Rowan, you belong to me. You stole my destiny. Security swarmed forward in an instant, but Gideon raised a single hand, signaling them to stop. Gideon stepped to the edge of the stage, looking down at the coughing, sputtering creature in the wheelchair with the cold, detached pity one reserved for a rabid dog in a gutter. Master Killian, Gideon said, his voice dropping into a dangerous, icy cadence. You are making a scene in front of our guests. Killian ignored him. His bloodshot eyes were fixed entirely on me, tears of blood and bile streaming down his cheeks. Rowan, look at me, Killian wailed, his voice cracking into high, hysterical pieces. I know you remember. You gave me twins in the last life. You cured my body. You loved me for 7 years. How could you throw yourself at Gideon Vance? The entire ballroom went dead silent. Guests began whispering in horror, looking at Killian as if he had lost his mind. To dementia. The twins? I asked softly, taking a step forward to stand beside Gideon. My voice was calm, but every word was a serrated blade forged in the fires of the grave. Do you mean the 1-month-old son whose skull you crushed with an iron rod in that freezing basement, Killian? Killian froze. The air in his throat seemed to turn to ash. Or do you mean the daughter you left to starve in the dark while you took Melody Lane to celebrate your freedom? I continued, looking down at his trembling, gray face. You told me I stole her fate. You told me she jumped from a building because of my jealousy. I pulled a sealed leather dossier from Gideon's assistant and tossed it directly onto Killian's lap. The paper spilled open, displaying high-resolution police reports, toxicology screens, and autopsy photos from 3 years prior. Look at your angel, Killian, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like thunder. Melody Lane didn't die of depression. She died in an underground gambling den in the East Docks from an intentional overdose of pure fentanyl. Surrounded by 3 men, she was selling the Sterling family's commercial secrets. No, that's a lie, Killian screamed, clawing at the papers with his bandaged hands. You forged this. Melody loved me. Did she? A sharp, feminine voice came from the side entrance of the hall. 4 uniformed police detectives walked into the ballroom, holding steel handcuffs. Between them, dressed in a torn cocktail dress with smeared makeup, her hands bound behind her back, was Melody Lane. Killian Sterling, the lead detective announced, holding up an arrest warrant. Your wife, Melody Lane, has just been apprehended at the International Private Airport attempting to board a charter flight to Panama with $14 million in bearer bonds stolen from the Sterling corporate vault. The detective turned on a pocket audio recorder. Melody's screeching, frantic voice blasted through the hall speakers. Let me go. Killian is a dying freak. He's going to be a corpse by next week. Anyway, why should I rot in that hospital with a cripple when I can take the money and live with Cashin in South America? The sound of Melody's voice was the final hammer blow that shattered Killian Sterling's sanity into dust. He stared at the woman in handcuffs. He looked at the audio recorder. Then he looked at his own swollen, rotting hands, covered in silk bandages that were slowly turning brown with pus. Every lie, every delusion, every cruel, arrogant justification he had clung to across 2 lifetimes disintegrated in a single, catastrophic instant. He had murdered his own flesh and blood. He had beaten the woman who had carried his salvation to death with an iron rod. He had thrown away the purest, most divine beacon of life the heavens could grant a man, all to worship a venomous, thieving parasite who viewed him as nothing more than a dying cash cow. Ag. Ag. Killian let out a shriek that was no longer human. He threw himself out of the wheelchair, tumbling onto the hard marble floor, vomiting a massive pool of black, clotted blood that splattered across the velvet stage risers. He began crawling on his elbows, dragging his paralyzed legs behind him, clawing his way toward my boots. Rowan, my wife, my savior. Killian wept, his fingernails tearing against the stone, leaving 10 bloody streaks on the floor. I was wrong. I was blind. Touch me, please, just touch my forehead once. The burning, my marrow, is on fire. Save me. He reached out with a trembling, bloody hand, desperately trying to touch the hem of my emerald gown. Gideon stepped forward. With a single, deliberate movement, Gideon's polished leather dress shoe came down on Killian's outstretched wrist, pinning his hand firmly to the floor. Gideon leaned down slightly, his dark eyes cold as the void of space. Do not dirty my wife's dress with your filthy hands, Master Killian, Gideon whispered, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. You chose your path. Now crawl to the end of it. Gideon turned to me, wrapping his arm securely around my waist, lifting me gently away from the puddle of blood. Let's go home, Rowan, Gideon murmured, his voice instantly softening with infinite love. The air in here is foul. Yes, I smiled, leaning my head against his broad chest. Let's go home. We walked down the stage stairs and exited the grand hall, surrounded by our security detail, leaving the disgraced Sterling family behind in the dark. The collapse of the Sterling empire was swift, brutal, and total. Within 2 weeks of the gala, the Sterling Group's stock plummeted by 94% following the unsealing of Melody's grand larceny indictments and the revelation of $40 million in unbacked corporate loans Killian had authorized while under the influence of narcotics. The banks foreclosed on the Sterling manor. Mrs. Sterling suffered a massive cerebral stroke upon the liquidation of her estate, spending her remaining days paralyzed in a state-run nursing home, unable to speak or move. Melody Lane was sentenced to 24 years at the maximum security women's correctional facility for grand theft, corporate espionage, and criminal conspiracy. And Killian, stripped of his wealth, his doctors, and his family name, Killian was moved to the palliative charity ward in the damp, mold-ridden basement of the county hospital, the very basement where the homeless and destitute were sent to die. His body was a living ruin. His lungs had calcified, his liver had failed, and the skin across his limbs was peeling away in necrotic sheets. The pain was so unimaginable that no amount of standard hospital analgesics could touch the fire burning inside his bones. Every single night, in his feverish delirium, he would hear the sound of an iron rod striking concrete. He would see the blood of his unborn children pooling around his cot. He would scream until his vocal cords tore, begging for a woman named Rowan to bring him water, but the only response was the steady cold dripping of the rusty pipes above his head. 8 months later, late spring, the gardens of the Vance estate were in full, magnificent bloom. Vast canopies of purple wisteria and white climbing roses arched over the stone paths, filling the warm morning air with a sweet, intoxicating perfume. I sat on a white wrought iron bench beneath the blooming arbor, wearing a loose, comfortable ivory linen dress. My belly was round and high. The doctors had confirmed it 3 months ago. I was carrying twins, a boy and a girl. Healthy, vibrant, and kicking with strong, steady pulses that filled my heart with boundless, untainted joy. Gideon walked across the sunlit lawn, holding a silver tray with a bowl of freshly picked wild strawberries and a glass of chilled almond milk. He had removed his suit jacket, wearing only a crisp white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, looking strong, sun-kissed, and breathtakingly handsome. He set the tray on the stone table, knelt beside my bench, and rested his cheek gently against the curve of my stomach. "How are my little conquerors doing today?" Gideon whispered, his hands warm and protective over my belly. As if in response, 2 distinct, tiny kicks pressed against his palm. Gideon laughed, a rich, deep, joyful sound that echoed through the garden, and looked up at me with eyes filled with pure adoration. "They have your strength, Rowan," he said, leaning up to press a soft, lingering kiss to my lips. "They have your peace, Gideon," I whispered back, running my fingers through his dark hair. Just then, the head butler walked down the stone path, holding a single sealed gray envelope. "Master Gideon, madam," the butler said with a respectful bow. "A notification from the county coroner's office. Killian Sterling passed away at 4 o'clock this morning in the basement palliative ward." Gideon paused, looking up at me, his hand tightening gently over mine. "Do you want to see the report, Rowan?" I looked at the gray envelope. Then, I looked out over the vast, sunlit gardens stretching before us, at the blooming wisteria, the azure sky, and the strong, honorable man kneeling at my feet, guarding the new life blooming within my womb. The past was dead. The blood had been washed clean, and the souls of my children had returned to me, safe, cherished, and surrounded by eternal light. "No," I said, a serene, radiant smile curving my lips as I took a ripe, sweet strawberry from the bowl. "Burn it." Gideon nodded to the butler, who bowed and retreated. Gideon stood up, sat beside me on the bench, and wrapped his strong arms securely around my shoulders, pulling me close against his beating heart. The warm spring breeze swept through the arbor, showering us in a gentle rain of purple wisteria petals, carrying us forward into a bright, boundless future that belonged wholly and beautifully to us.